The message on Director Colves's screen made him frown for the third time that morning. A human wanted to teach at the Galactic Defense Academy. Not just any human, but one who claimed expertise in survival and combat training. The director leaned back in his chair and sighed. Humans had only joined the coalition 5 years ago. They were new, untested, and frankly unremarkable by galactic standards. "Send him in," the director finally said into his communicator. The human who entered was not impressive. He stood at average height for his species with dark hair and calm eyes. He wore simple clothing, not the decorative armor most warrior species preferred. His name was Do-Yun, and his file said he had 20 years of military experience on Earth. "You understand this is unusual," Director Colves said, his forearms folded across his chest. "The Academy trains the finest warriors in the galaxy. Our instructors are legendary fighters from species with thousands of years of military tradition." Do-Yun nodded. "I understand, sir." "Then help me understand why a human thinks he can teach here. Your species has no coalition battle experience. Earth has never faced a galactic threat. You have no natural advantages in strength, speed, or durability." "That's exactly why I can teach here," Do-Yun replied calmly. "My species learned to survive without those advantages. We learned to adapt, to improvise, to overcome limitations. That's what I want to share." The director studied him for a long moment. Then he made a decision that surprised even himself. "Very well. You'll start with the remedial group, 8 cadets who have failed standard combat training twice. If you can improve their performance, we'll discuss a permanent position." Do-Yun smiled slightly. "Thank you, sir. I won't disappoint." 3 days later, Do-Yun stood in Training Hall 7 waiting for his new students. The room was large and sterile, with white walls and standard exercise equipment. Through the observation window above, he could see other instructors gathering to watch. Word had spread about the human instructor, and many wanted to see him fail. The cadets arrived one by one. First came Huan, the only other human on the station. She looked nervous and young, barely 19 years old. Then came Taxus, a massive Vraxian with scaled purple skin and fierce eyes. His species were born warriors, and shame radiated from his posture at being in the remedial group. Piptic scuttled in next, an insectoid clyth with multiple legs and compound eyes. She had been separated from her hive mind and struggled to function independently. Morvex followed, an amphibious Quellan whose green skin glistened with moisture. His movements were slow and methodical, reflecting his species' careful nature. The remaining 4 cadets represented different species, each with their own reasons for failing. By the time all 8 stood before him, Do-Yun could feel their combined frustration and defeat. They had been told they weren't good enough, weren't strong enough, weren't smart enough. "I'm Do-Yun," he said simply. "I'm human. I know what you're thinking. Humans are weak. We're slow. We have no natural weapons or armor. You're wondering what I could possibly teach you." Taxus snorted, confirming the thought. "Before we begin, I want to see what you can do. Standard Combat Simulation Level 3. Show me your training." The cadets moved to their positions. The simulation activated, projecting holographic enemies around the room. For the next 15 minutes, Do-Yun watched carefully. The cadets knew the textbook responses. They understood tactics in theory. But when pressure increased, they panicked. They fought as individuals, not as a team. When unexpected obstacles appeared, they froze instead of adapting. The simulation ended with complete failure. The cadets stood breathing heavily, looking even more defeated than before. "Again," Do-Yun said. They repeated the exercise with the same result. And again. And again. By the 4th attempt, frustration boiled over. "This is pointless," Taxus roared. "We already know we're failures. We don't need a human to confirm it." Do-Yun walked to the center of the room. "You're not failures. You're just being taught wrong. Every species in this academy teaches you to use advantages you don't have. They train you to be stronger, faster, more aggressive. But what happens when you face an enemy who's stronger, faster, more aggressive than you?" The cadets exchanged glances. No one had asked them that before. "My species survived on a dangerous planet surrounded by creatures that could kill us easily. We had no claws, no venom, no thick skin. We survived by learning to adapt, to think, to use everything around us as a tool. That's what I'm going to teach you." "Survival training?" Huan asked. "But we're supposed to be warriors." "You can't be warriors if you don't survive long enough to fight," Do-Yun replied. "Starting tomorrow, we forget everything you've learned about combat. We start with basics. In the observation room above, Instructor Velthar laughed. He was a towering Vraxian with scars from 100 battles. The human thinks survival skills will help them in combat? This will be entertaining to watch. Beside him, Instructor Komix remained silent. The Gelthian's large eyes studied Doyen with curiosity. Something about the human's calm confidence was intriguing. The next morning, the cadets arrived to find Training Hall 7 transformed. The sterile room now contained logs, rocks, dried vegetation, and containers of water. It looked nothing like a military training facility. "Today you learn to make fire without technology," Doyen announced. "This is absurd," Taxis protested. "I come from a warrior lineage spanning 3,000 years. My ancestors conquered 12 worlds. I don't need to learn primitive skills." "Then leave," Doyen said calmly. "The door is open. But if you stay, you follow my training. Your choice." Taxis trembled with anger but didn't leave. Despite his pride, he had nowhere else to go. He had already failed twice. This human was his last chance. Doyen spent the day teaching them friction fires, spark generation, and fuel management. The work was frustrating and difficult. Species with claws found the delicate work challenging. Those with different hand structures struggled with the techniques. But slowly, after hours of effort, fires began to appear. When Piptic finally created a small flame, she clicked her mandibles in triumph. The other cadets cheered. It was a tiny victory, but for the first time, they had succeeded at something together. Over the following weeks, Doyen taught them water purification, shelter construction, navigation by stars, and tracking, skills that seemed completely unrelated to modern warfare. The other instructors mocked the remedial group openly. Videos of them gathering sticks and building fires circulated among the staff as jokes. But something was changing in the 8 cadets. They started moving differently, more aware of their surroundings. They began helping each other instinctively. The shame of being remedial students slowly transformed into something else. Pride in learning skills no one else at the academy possessed. Doyen watched them grow and knew he was ready for the next phase. Soon they would understand why survival came before victory. Soon they would learn what it truly meant to fight like a human. The 5th week of training began with something different. Doyen led his 8 cadets to the Academy's environmental simulator, a massive chamber that could recreate any planetary condition. The other cadets usually used it for climate adaptation exercises or environmental combat training. Doyen had requested something else entirely. "Today we navigate hostile terrain and reach extraction point Alpha," he announced. "You have standard equipment, communicators, and tools. Time limit is 6 hours. The cadets looked at each other with relief. This sounded like normal academy training, not the primitive skills they had been learning. They entered the simulator confidently as the doors sealed behind them. The environment materialized around them, a dense jungle with thick vegetation, humid air, and the sounds of unseen creatures. The temperature immediately climbed to uncomfortable levels. Taxis took point naturally, his warrior instincts taking over. Morvex checked his navigation device while Hewan activated her communicator to contact command. Nothing worked. "My device is dead," Morvex said, tapping the screen. "Mine too," Piptic clicked nervously. "All electronics are failing." Panic started to spread through the group. Without technology, they were just 8 bodies in a hostile jungle. Hewan looked around wildly, remembering every training scenario that emphasized equipment reliability. "What do we do?" asked Jiho, a small reptilian cadet who usually stayed quiet. From somewhere outside the simulation, Doyen's voice echoed through hidden speakers. "Equipment fails. Technology breaks. Now show me what you learned. You have 18 hours, not 6. Good luck. 18 hours? Taxis roared at the sky. "This is madness." But the human instructor didn't respond. The cadets were alone. For the first hour, they argued. Taxis wanted to move immediately in what he thought was the right direction. Hewan suggested waiting for rescue. Piptic's anxiety made her pace in circles, her multiple legs creating nervous patterns in the dirt. It was Morvex who finally spoke in his slow, careful way. "We learned skills for situations exactly like this. Perhaps the human knew this would happen." "You think he disabled our equipment on purpose?" Sora, a feline Tekari cadet, asked. "Yes," Morvex replied. "This is a test of adaptation." Slowly, the cadets began to remember their training. Hayawan suggested using the sun's position to determine direction. Taxis, despite his pride, admitted he remembered the navigation techniques Doyen had taught. Piptic's multiple eyes could spot details in the vegetation that others missed. They found water using signs of animal tracks and moisture-loving plants. Morvex, being amphibious, tested it for safety before they purified it, using the filtration methods they had learned. When night fell and temperature dropped, they built shelter using branches and leaves, working together to create something that protected all 8 despite their different body types. The real breakthrough came during the night. Strange sounds echoed through the jungle, simulated predators moving in the darkness. In normal training, they would have relied on sensors and weapons. Now they had only each other. "We need a watch rotation," Hywan suggested. Like Doyen taught us for camp security, they organized shifts with each cadet using their natural advantages. Piptic's compound eyes could see better in low light. Sora's hearing could detect movements others missed. Taxus's strength meant he could defend if something attacked. But nothing attacked because they had positioned their shelter correctly, built a fire that deterred predators, and remained alert as a unit. The night passed safely. By dawn, something fundamental had changed. The 8 cadets who had spent weeks feeling like failures were now moving like a coordinated team. Taxus no longer tried to dominate every decision. Piptic's nervousness transformed into focused attention on details. Hywan found confidence in skills she never knew she would need. The journey to extraction took another full day. They faced obstacles that required problem-solving, a river too dangerous to cross directly, cliffs that needed careful climbing, and plants that simulated toxic properties. Each challenge was solved by combining their different abilities and the survival techniques Doyen had drilled into them. When they finally reached the extraction point, exhausted but successful, the simulation ended. The jungle dissolved, revealing the plain metal walls of the simulator chamber. Doyen stood waiting with water and nutrition packs. 18 hours and 43 minutes, he said. "Well done." Taxus approached him, and for a moment his expression was unreadable. Then the massive Vraxian did something that shocked everyone. He bowed his head slightly in respect. "I understand now," Taxus said. "When we have advantages, we're individuals. When we have nothing, we become a team." Doyen smiled. "Now you're ready for real combat training." Word of the simulation's success spread through the academy. Other instructors dismissed it as luck or a rigged scenario. But some cadets from regular classes started asking the remedial group questions. How did you navigate without devices? How did you survive 18 hours with no support? The remedial group's answers were always the same. The human taught us. Instructor Komix attended the next training session personally. She watched as Doyen taught hand-to-hand combat techniques that seemed completely wrong by traditional standards. He taught them to fight larger opponents by using leverage, not strength. To defeat faster enemies by controlling space and timing. To turn every disadvantage into a strategic opportunity. "You'll notice I'm not teaching you to be better fighters," Doyen explained while demonstrating a throw on Taxus that used the Vraxian's own momentum against him. "I'm teaching you to be smarter fighters. Every species at this academy has cadets who are naturally talented warriors. You 8 aren't those cadets, so we don't fight their way. We fight the human way." "What is the human way?" Hywan asked. "Make every fight unfair in your favor. Use terrain. Use surprise. Use psychology. Make the enemy think you're weak when you're planning. Make them think you're beaten when you're setting a trap. Honor is for species that can afford it. Humans learned that survival comes first." Instructor Velthar, watching from the observation room, was furious. "He's teaching them cowardice. This is not warrior training. This is teaching them to be sneaky and dishonorable." But Instructor Komix's analytical mind saw something different. He's teaching them to win against superior opponents. Interesting approach. The training intensified. Doyen created scenarios where everything went wrong. Weapons jammed, allies were injured, communications failed, and plans fell apart. Each time, the cadets had to improvise solutions using only their wits and teamwork. During one exercise, Jiho was simulated as wounded and unable to move. Standard protocol said to call for medical evacuation, but Doyen had disabled their communicators again. The cadets didn't panic this time. Morvex and Sora created a stretcher from available materials. Piptic scouted the safest route. Taxus and another cadet provided security. Hywan coordinated the movement. They adapted and succeeded. Improvise, adapt, overcome became their unofficial motto. They repeated it to each other during difficult exercises. They wrote it on their training boards. It became their identity. By the 8th week, the change was obvious to everyone. The remedial group moved through the academy's common areas with new confidence. They sat together, studied together, and trained together outside official hours. Other cadets noticed, and some began asking to join their study sessions. But not everyone was pleased. Instructor Velthar filed a formal complaint with Director Kolves. "This human is ruining those cadets," Velthar argued. "He teaches them to abandon honor, to fight without courage, to win through trickery. This is not what the Galactic Defense Academy represents." Director Kolves reviewed footage of the training sessions. He saw cadets learning to survive impossible odds. He saw teamwork that surpassed many regular units, but he also saw techniques that violated traditional warrior codes. "We'll settle this with an evaluation," the director decided. "Your advanced combat class against the remedial group. Full simulation with standard wargame rules. If the human's methods are superior, he stays. If not, he leaves," Velthar smiled. His advanced class had 20 cadets, all from warrior species, all physically superior to the remedial group. It would be a massacre, and it would prove that traditional training was superior to human tricks. News of the evaluation spread through the academy like fire. Everyone wanted to watch the remedial group face Instructor Velthar's advanced combat class. The betting pools were completely one-sided. 20 trained warriors against 8 failures led by a human? The outcome seemed obvious. Doyen gathered his cadets in their training hall 3 days before the evaluation. They looked nervous. Even after all their progress, the reality of facing twice their number in combat was intimidating. "I won't lie to you," Doyen said calmly. "They're better equipped, better trained by traditional standards, and physically superior. If we fight their way, we lose in 5 minutes. So how do we fight?" Hywan asked. "We fight like humans do when facing impossible odds. We cheat." The cadets looked shocked. Cheating was dishonorable in most military cultures. Doyen smiled. "Not cheating by breaking rules. Cheating by making the fight unfair before it starts. They expect a battle. We'll give them a war. They think in terms of combat. We'll think in terms of survival. And the first rule of survival is that the enemy doesn't get to choose how the fight happens." Over the next 3 days, Doyen taught them everything Earth's military history had learned about asymmetric warfare. The cadets studied human battles where smaller forces defeated larger ones, guerrilla tactics, ambush strategies, psychological warfare, and the importance of terrain. Every advantage they have can be turned against them, Doyen explained while drawing diagrams. They're stronger? That makes them confident and less cautious. They're trained in formation fighting? That makes them predictable. They expect honor? That makes them vulnerable to surprise. Taxis struggled with the concepts. His entire culture valued direct combat and honorable victory. "My ancestors would call this cowardice," he said quietly. "Your ancestors aren't here. You are." Doyen met his eyes. "And you want to win. I'm giving you the tools to beat opponents who should defeat you. What you do with those tools is your choice." The night before the evaluation, Doyen found Hywan sitting alone in the observation lounge, staring at Earth through the station's large viewport. Their homeworld was a blue jewel in the distance. "Nervous?" he asked, sitting beside her. "Terrified," she admitted. "Everyone expects us to fail. Some people are actually excited to watch it happen. They want proof that humans don't belong here. Do you believe that?" Hywan was quiet for a moment. 2 months ago I did. I was the worst cadet here. I failed every physical test. I couldn't keep up with anyone. I thought being human meant being weak. And now? Now I understand that humans aren't weak. We're different. We survive by being smarter, not stronger. By working together, not alone. By adapting instead of overpowering. She looked at him. "You taught me that." "I taught you skills," Doyen corrected. "You learned to believe in them." That's the hard part. The evaluation day arrived. The Academy's main combat simulator was packed with observers. Every instructor attended, along with cadets from all classes who wanted to watch. Director Kolves sat in the center of the observation deck, his expression neutral. The two groups entered from opposite sides. Velthar's advanced class wore full combat gear and carried standard-issue weapons. They looked magnificent, a perfect example of coalition military excellence. Each cadet represented the peak physical specimen of their species. The remedial group looked small by comparison. 8 cadets against 20. They carried the same equipment, but their body language was different. They weren't standing in formation. They were clustered together, speaking quietly. The scenario is simple, Director Colves announced over the speakers. Capture and hold the central objective point. Standard combat rules apply. Non-lethal simulation weapons only. Begin. The simulation environment materialized around them. A ruined city with multiple levels, destroyed buildings, narrow streets, and various choke points. Perfect for traditional urban combat tactics. Velthar's class moved immediately with textbook precision. They advanced in formation, covering each other's movements, communicating efficiently. It was beautiful to watch, a demonstration of everything the Academy taught. The remedial group ran. They scattered and retreated into the ruins without firing a single shot. The observation deck erupted in confused murmurs. Some instructors laughed. It looked like the remedial group was already beaten, running in fear before the fight even started. Cowards, Velthar muttered from his position in the control room. But Doyen watched his team's movements on the tactical display and smiled. They weren't retreating. They were repositioning. Velthar's class reached the central objective unopposed. They set up defensive positions confident in their victory. Their leader, a massive insectoid named Crix, established a perimeter and sent scouts to find the retreating enemy. That's when the trap began. The scouts encountered resistance in 3 different locations simultaneously. Quick, sharp attacks that eliminated 1 or 2 cadets before vanishing. Crix pulled his forces back to regroup, but the attacks continued from unexpected angles. Taxus led a team that used the building's collapsed structure to attack from above, dropping on opponents and eliminating them before they could react. Piptic used her small size and multiple legs to move through spaces the larger cadets couldn't access, appearing and disappearing like a ghost. Morvex used water features in the environment to create slippery ambush points where his amphibious advantages dominated. The remedial group wasn't fighting a battle. They were hunting. Each attack was coordinated perfectly. They used communication signals Doyen had taught them, bird calls and clicks that sounded natural in the urban ruin environment. They used terrain that negated the enemy's physical advantages. They attacked when their opponents were split up or distracted, never engaging in fair fights. Velthar's class began to panic. They were trained for direct combat, not this constant harassment. Every time they tried to regroup, another attack came from an unexpected direction. Their numbers dwindled. Crix made a decision to abandon the objective and hunt down the remedial group directly. He split his remaining forces into 3 groups to sweep the area. It was exactly what Doyen's team wanted. Haiwan's group set an ambush using debris and shadows. When 5 of Velthar's cadets walked into the kill zone, the entire area collapsed on them. A carefully prepared trap using the unstable building structure, 5 eliminations in seconds. Jiho, the quiet reptilian cadet, used his natural camouflage to blend into rubble and provided intelligence on enemy movements. His information allowed the remedial group to avoid strong opposition and target weak points. The psychological warfare started midway through the engagement. The remedial group began making noises, creating false movement, and leaving signs that suggested larger numbers than they actually had. Velthar's remaining cadets started seeing threats everywhere, wasting ammunition on shadows. Sora used her feline agility to steal equipment from eliminated opponents, denying Velthar's team resources while improving their own position. It was a tactic called living off the enemy that human forces had used for centuries. In the observation deck, the mood had completely changed. Instructors leaned forward, watching intently. This wasn't the massacre they expected. The remedial group was winning. With only 6 of Velthar's cadets remaining, Crix tried to make a final stand at the objective point. He called his team together for one coordinated defense. But the remedial group didn't attack the objective. They surrounded it and waited. "What are they doing?" an instructor asked. Doyun could have answered, but he remained silent. His team was demonstrating patience, another human survival trait. They had eliminated most of the enemy and controlled the terrain. Time was on their side. Crix finally ordered his remaining team to break out and engage. They charged from the objective, determined to force a direct fight. The remedial group scattered again, but this time it was coordinated. They led Crix's team into separate pursuits, splitting them apart one final time. The last engagements were quick and brutal. 6 against 8, but never 6 against 8. Always 2 or 3 of the remedial group against one isolated opponent. They used every trick, false retreats, feints, environmental hazards, and perfect teamwork. When the simulation ended, only one of Velthar's cadets remained active, and all 8 of the remedial group were still operational. The observation deck sat in stunned silence. The silence in the observation deck stretched for what felt like forever. Dozens of instructors and cadets stared at the tactical display showing the final results. 8 green indicators representing the remedial group, scattered but active. 20 red indicators showing Velthar's eliminated advanced class. Then Instructor Komix began to applaud. The sound was slow and deliberate, her large hands creating a rhythm that echoed through the chamber. One by one, other instructors joined. Even some who had mocked the humans' methods couldn't deny what they had witnessed. Director Kolves stood and descended to the simulator floor. The 2 teams emerged from opposite entrances, both breathing heavily. Velthar's cadets looked shocked and defeated. The remedial group looked exhausted but quietly proud. Instructor Velthar, the director said formally, you requested this evaluation to prove traditional methods superior to the humans' approach. Do you wish to maintain that position? Velthar stood rigid, his pride clearly wounded. But he was a warrior first, and warriors respected victory. No, Director. The results speak clearly. The director turned to the remedial group. Explain your tactics. The Academy needs to understand how 8 cadets defeated 20 superior opponents. The cadets looked at each other, uncertain who should speak. Finally, Taxis stepped forward. The massive Vraxian, who had once called Doyen's training absurd, chose his words carefully. We didn't fight superior opponents, Taxis said. We eliminated the superiority before the fight began. They were stronger, yes, but strength means nothing if you can't reach your enemy. They were better trained in standard tactics, yes, but standard tactics become predictable. They expected a battle. We gave them a hunt, Morvex added in his slow, methodical way. We used terrain to eliminate their advantages. Buildings favored ambush over strength. Narrow passages negated formation tactics. Multiple levels prevented coordinated assaults. The environment became our ally. And the psychological warfare? Director Kolves asked. The false sounds, the apparent larger numbers? Piptik clicked her mandibles nervously but spoke clearly. We made them afraid. Fear makes mistakes. Mistakes create opportunities. The human taught us that winning begins before fighting starts. This is not honorable combat, one instructor protested from the observation deck. These tactics are beneath warrior traditions. He once surprised everyone by responding. The young human who had been the weakest cadet months ago spoke with quiet confidence. Honor doesn't keep you alive when you're outnumbered and outgunned. Adaptation does. My species learned that lesson across thousands of years of warfare. We were never the strongest predator. We survived by being the smartest. Director Kolves studied the remedial group carefully. And who taught you to think this way? To fight this way? Every single cadet, without hesitation or discussion, turned and pointed at Doyen. The human stood at the edge of the simulator floor, observing quietly as he always did. The human did, they said together. The director nodded slowly. Instructor Doyen, you will present your training methodology to the full instructor council tomorrow. We need to understand this approach completely. That evening, the remedial group celebrated in their training hall. Food from various worlds covered the tables they had pushed together. For the first time since arriving at the academy, they felt like winners instead of failures. I still can't believe we did it, Jiho said quietly. The small reptilian cadet had spent most of his academy time being overlooked and dismissed. We did it because we stopped trying to be what we're not, Sora replied, her feline features showing a rare smile. We're not elite warriors like the advanced class. We're survivors. That's better. Taxis raised his drinking container. To the human who taught us that limitations are just problems waiting for solutions. They all drank to that. Doyen, sitting slightly apart as instructors usually did, nodded in acknowledgement. But Hewan noticed something in his expression. A sadness, perhaps, or concern. What's wrong? She asked quietly, moving to sit beside him. Tomorrow I have to explain human military philosophy to species that have never needed it, Doyen said. They won't understand it. Not really. Your species only develops these methods when you have no other choice. Then make them understand. Show them what you showed us. The next day, the instructor council chamber was full. Every teaching staff member attended, along with Director Kolves and several senior coalition military advisors who had heard about the evaluation results. They filled the curved seating area, looking down at the presentation floor where Doyen stood alone. He had prepared no fancy displays or detailed tactical breakdowns. Instead, he had a simple holographic projector showing Earth. My species evolved on a deadly planet, Doyen began. We had no natural weapons. No claws, no venom, no armored skin. We were slow compared to predators. Weak compared to megafauna. We should have gone extinct. The hologram showed various Earth animals, lions, bears, crocodiles, snakes. Creatures that could easily kill an unarmed human. So we learned to use tools. Rocks became hammers. Sticks became spears. We learned to throw objects with accuracy no other species could match. We learned to track prey for days until it collapsed from exhaustion. We learned to work in groups, coordinating complex hunts that brought down animals 10 times our size. The images shifted to show human history. Primitive hunters, ancient warfare, medieval battles, modern conflicts. But our greatest enemy wasn't animals. It was other humans. For thousands of years we fought ourselves, tribe against tribe, nation against nation, ideology against ideology. We developed warfare into a brutal science. And here's what we learned. The strong don't always win. The clever do. Doyen showed historical battles where smaller forces defeated larger ones. He explained guerrilla warfare, asymmetric tactics, psychological operations, and the importance of adaptability. Every species here represents warriors who won through natural advantages, Doyen continued. The Vraxians are physically superior. The Gelthians have enhanced intelligence, the Clith coordinate through hive minds. You all fought enemies similar to yourselves, so you developed honor codes and traditional tactics. He paused, letting that sink in. Humans never had that luxury. We fought enemies who were always different, always changing. So we learned the only rule that mattered. Survive first, win second, and honor third. Not because we lack honor, but because dead warriors can't be honorable. You're advocating for abandoning military tradition, Instructor Velthar said. His tone wasn't hostile anymore, just uncertain. No, Doyen replied. I'm advocating for adding human methodology to coalition training. Your traditional tactics work against traditional opponents, but what happens when you face an enemy that doesn't fight traditionally? An enemy that uses your strengths against you? An enemy that adapts faster than you can plan? Instructor Komik spoke up, her analytical mind engaged. You're preparing cadets for unknown threats. The evaluation demonstrated that traditional superiority becomes irrelevant when the battlefield itself changes. Exactly. The remedial group won because they didn't try to match the advanced class's strengths. They eliminated those strengths by controlling how the fight happened. That's the human approach, make every engagement unfair in your favor. Director Kolves leaned forward. You're suggesting we train all cadets this way? I'm suggesting you give them options. Teach traditional methods for traditional warfare, but also teach survival, adaptation, improvisation, and asymmetric tactics. Let cadets learn that limitations can become advantages with the right mindset. The council chamber erupted in debate. Some instructors were intrigued. Others were offended. The argument continued for hours, with Doyen patiently answering questions and explaining concepts that seemed alien to most species present. Finally, Director Kolves called for order. We will implement a trial program. Instructor Doyen's methods will be integrated into standard curriculum on a voluntary basis. Instructors may incorporate survival and adaptation training as they see fit. The remedial group will be redesignated as Advanced Adaptive Combat Unit to reflect their specialized training. It wasn't everything, but it was a start. As the council dismissed and instructors filed out, several approached Doyen with questions. They wanted to understand more about human history, about asymmetric warfare, about teaching cadets to think instead of just fight. Velthar was the last to leave. He stopped in front of Doyen, towering over the human. For a moment, tension filled the air. Then the massive Vraxian bowed his head slightly. I was wrong about you, and about your species. You have much to teach us. And you have much to teach me, Doyen replied respectfully. Traditional combat has value. I'm just adding another option. As Velthar left, Instructor Komix approached. The council is cautious, but I see the value immediately. May I observe your next training cycle? Doyen smiled. You're welcome anytime. Change was coming to the Galactic Defense Academy. Slowly, perhaps, but inevitably, because 8 cadets had proven that the human way worked, and in military training results matter more than tradition. 6 months after the evaluation, the Galactic Defense Academy looked different, not in physical structure but in spirit. The changes started small: an instructor incorporating navigation without technology into their curriculum, another teaching basic survival skills during environmental training. But word of the remedial group's victory had spread throughout the coalition, and more cadets requested transfer to the academy specifically to learn the human methods. Doyun's Advanced Adaptive Combat Unit had grown from 8 cadets to 24. The waiting list contained over 100 names, but he refused to expand too quickly. Real learning took time, and he wouldn't compromise quality for quantity. The original 8 had become junior instructors themselves, teaching newer cadets the basics while continuing their own advanced training. Watching Taxus explain fire-starting techniques to a group of confused warriors from a heavy-gravity world never stopped being amusing. The massive Vraxian, who had once scorned primitive skills, now taught them with genuine passion. "The human showed me that strength without adaptability is just waiting to fail," Taxus told his students during a lecture on improvisation. "My species conquered worlds through power. But power didn't prepare me for situations where power was useless. Survival did." Yuan had transformed the most visibly. The young human who had arrived as the Academy's weakest cadet was now preparing to graduate top of her expanded class. She had won 3 combat tournaments using techniques that baffled opponents, fighting styles that used their own advantages against them, tactics that turned every arena into a trap, and psychological warfare that made stronger fighters hesitate. During her final examination, she faced a Vraxian twice her size in hand-to-hand combat. The match lasted less than 2 minutes. She used his aggression to overextend him, his strength to throw him, and his traditional training to predict his moves. When she stood victorious, the observation crowd erupted in applause. Afterwards, she found Doyun watching from the upper level. "I learned from the best," she said simply. "You learned from yourself," Doyun corrected. "I just showed you that being human wasn't a disadvantage. You proved it." The Academy's traditional instructors had gradually accepted the new methods, some more enthusiastically than others. Instructor Velthar had become an unexpected ally. He had spent months studying human military history, fascinated by how such a physically average species had survived so long. "Your planet's history is absolutely brutal," Velthar said one day while reviewing Earth's wars with Doyun. "Humans fought each other with a creativity and ruthlessness that rivals any species I've studied. It's horrifying and impressive. We learned from the best teachers necessity and desperation," Doyun replied. "When survival is at stake, you develop solutions that stable species never need." Instructor Kyomix had fully integrated adaptive training into her tactics courses. Her analytical approach combined perfectly with human methodology. She taught cadets to analyze opponents for weaknesses rather than just strengths, to study environments for advantages, and to plan operations around adaptation rather than overwhelming force. The real test came during the annual coalition training exercises. The Academy sent teams to compete against military units from established coalition species. For the first time, they sent the Advanced Adaptive Combat Unit. The exercises took place across multiple planets with varied conditions. Traditional units performed well in expected scenarios but struggled when conditions changed. The Advanced Adaptive Combat Unit excelled in chaos. During one exercise on a frozen moon, equipment malfunctions forced teams to survive without technology for 36 hours. Most units called for emergency extraction. The Advanced Adaptive Combat Unit built shelters, created fire, melted ice for water, and completed their mission objectives ahead of schedule. They performed like they expected the equipment to fail, the exercise coordinator reported with amazement. While other teams panicked, they just adapted and continued. That attitude defined the unit. They trained constantly for situations where nothing worked as planned, where advantages disappeared, and where survival required creativity. Their motto, improvise, adapt, overcome, became recognized throughout coalition military circles. The units trained in human methodology began receiving special assignments, rescue operations in hostile conditions, reconnaissance missions in unfamiliar terrain, and situations where traditional overwhelming force wasn't an option. They succeeded more often than established units, not through superiority but through flexibility. 2 years after Doyun's arrival, Director Kolves made an announcement that shocked the Academy. Human methodology would become part of core curriculum for all cadets. Every student would complete basic survival and adaptation training before advancing to specialized combat courses. We are preparing warriors for unknown futures, the director explained during the academy-wide assembly. Traditional training prepares them for expected threats. Human training prepares them for unexpected ones. Both are necessary. The announcement met mixed reactions. Some species representatives protested that it undermined warrior traditions. Others argued it was practical evolution of military training. But the results from field operations spoke clearly. Adaptable warriors survived and succeeded where traditional warriors sometimes failed. Doyen stood in the back during the announcement, uncomfortable with attention as always. He had never sought recognition, just effectiveness, but he felt satisfaction knowing that his species' hard-learned lessons were helping others survive. Graduation day for the original 8 remedial cadets was an emotional event. They walked across the stage wearing the Academy's highest honors, no longer failures but pioneers. The audience included instructors, families, and military officials from across the coalition. When Huan received her diploma, she paused at the podium. She hadn't planned to speak, but words came naturally. 2 years ago, I believed being human meant being weak. I failed every test. I couldn't compete with species that were stronger, faster, or more naturally gifted for combat. Then Instructor Doyen taught me something important. Limitations are just problems waiting for solutions. She looked at Doyen in the audience. He taught us that humans survived by refusing to accept defeat. We learned to use tools when we lacked claws. We learned to work together when we couldn't fight alone. We learned to think when we couldn't overpower. Those aren't weaknesses. They're the greatest strengths any species can develop. The audience applauded as she left the stage, but the moment that would be remembered happened during the reception afterwards. A young cadet from a newly joined coalition species approached Taxis. The cadet was small, physically weak by warrior standards and clearly discouraged by early training failures. I heard you were remedial, the cadet said hesitantly, that you failed twice before succeeding. How did you do it? Taxis smiled, remembering his own journey from arrogant failure to successful graduate. I stopped trying to be what I wasn't. I learned to use what I had, and I learned from someone who understood that survival is the first victory. Who taught you that? The cadet asked. Taxis didn't need to think about the answer. He pointed across the room at Doyen, who was talking quietly with Instructor Comics. The human did. That answer echoed through the years that followed. As human methodology spread through coalition military forces, as more cadets learned to adapt and survive rather than just fight, the question was always the same. Who taught them that way of thinking? The answer was always the same: the human did. 5 years after Doyen's arrival, a crisis tested everything the Academy had developed. A coalition exploration vessel was stranded on a hostile planet after encountering an unknown enemy that disabled all technology. 200 personnel trapped with no communications, no functioning equipment, and no immediate rescue possible. The Coalition Command sent every available rescue team. Most were traditional military units with standard equipment and tactics. They planned overwhelming force and coordinated assault. Doyen looked at the mission parameters and saw something different. He saw a situation where traditional advantages were useless. Technology didn't work. Numbers were limited. Standard tactics would fail. Let me take the Advanced Adaptive Combat Unit, he proposed. 50 personnel trained for exactly this scenario. Coalition Command was skeptical. Why send a smaller force of Academy instructors when they had battle-hardened military units available? But Director Colves supported the request, and Instructor Velthar argued passionately that human methodology was designed for impossible situations. The unit deployed with minimal equipment, basic tools, physical weapons, and skills that required no technology. They landed far from the stranded vessel and approached through terrain the enemy didn't expect anyone to cross. When other rescue teams engaged the enemy with traditional tactics and were repelled, the Advanced Adaptive Combat Unit infiltrated using survival techniques in asymmetric warfare. They lived off the hostile planet, used terrain that seemed impassable, and moved like ghosts through enemy territory. The rescue took 3 weeks of brutal survival conditions. The unit extracted all 200 personnel using tactics the enemy never anticipated. Night operations without technology, movement through areas considered impossible to traverse, and psychological warfare that made a smaller force seem larger. When they returned, Coalition Military Command could no longer dismiss human methodology as Academy curiosity. It became standard training across all Coalition forces. Doyen retired from active teaching 5 years later, but his legacy lived on. The Academy now graduated warriors who understood that strength came in many forms. Physical power was valuable, but adaptability, creativity, and the refusal to accept defeat were equally important. Hyun took over the Advanced Adaptive Combat Unit. She taught new generations that being human wasn't about physical advantages. It was about surviving when everything else failed, adapting when situations changed, and overcoming through intelligence and teamwork. The question was still asked in training halls throughout the Coalition: who taught them to fight that way? Who showed them that survival comes before victory? Who demonstrated that limitations can become strengths? And the answer, passed down through generations of cadets, instructors, and warriors, remained the same. The human did.